Welcome to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. Some good news. Today's jobs report was better than almost anyone expected. Unemployment actually dropping to 13.3%, though that is still shockingly high by historic levels. And if you break it down, Black unemployment climbed to the highest point in more than a decade. It dropped, however, for white Americans, the highest unemployment rate, though, shown among Latin Americans. Curfews, meantime, have lifted in many cities but remain in New York as we go into another weekend of protests. A record number of National Guard troops have been deployed across the country, but the mayor of Washington, D.C. has asked President Trump to withdraw troops from her city. The president, of course, pushing back. For what it all means in the markets, I want to bring in our Bloomberg Markets reporter, Abigail Doolittle. So talk to us about the ups and the downs today, Abigail.
Well, today, Emily, it was all about the ups. Investors squarely focused on that jobs report that came in so much better than absolutely anybody expected at all. The estimate was for a loss of 7.5 million jobs. Instead, we had an add of 2.5 million jobs, which is great news for the country and great news certainly for those folks who are in those new jobs and for the folks who did not lose their jobs. As for the stock market, what's very interesting here, Emily, of course, we've had this debate going on about whether or not stocks should be up so much since the March lows. After this jobs report, this economic data, you could perhaps make the case that stocks have been right, that economists, that survey was wrong. Somebody such as myself who is questioning whether or not stocks should be high against what I'm seeing in the real world is wrong, quite frankly, although a month does not a trend make. Let's see whether or not that continues. There's some saying that there could unfortunately be more waves ahead, but relative to stocks, there you see it, the NASDAQ 100 closing at an all-time high, its best day in more than a month. The New York FANG index strong, the SOX strong, Apple really helping out all of those major averages up 3%. So really a lot of good risk appetite flowing right through there for stocks on the day on this big jobs report. Investors, traders largely looking past this social unrest, the feeling that it's over. Let's hope that that is the case. And relative to the indexes out of the March lows, here we're showing a chart of the FANG index up 54%, going back to the idea of it was hard to stomach that given some of the economic data that we've had. And of course, the jobless claims, it's hard to square that away with this big payrolls report that we've had. But this payrolls report would support the idea that stocks were right to climb. But again, let's see if it continues.
There was one notable down, and that was Slack on the back of their earnings results and withdrawing billings forecast for the year. Slack down 14%. We're going to speak with CEO Stuart Butterfield a bit later in the show. But was that an anomaly today, Abigail?
That was certainly an anomaly, and for fundamental reasons, company-specific reasons, idiosyncratic reasons relative to the company. So that quarter, they actually beat estimates, but they still put up a small loss. Expectations going into this quarter, Emily, were so high, as you know, everybody thinking that they're really going to benefit from the work-at-home trends. They did, but not as big as folks expected. They did withdraw that billings guidance. That's never a good thing when guidance is withdrawn. One takeaway here might just be the idea that working at home, folks prefer to Zoom. They don't need this messaging software quite as much as some had thought. Another piece of it, though, is valuation. This stock, Emily, speaking of too far, too fast, out of the March lows, it more than doubled out of those March lows. So investors and traders had expected big things. And you can see there the spread between Slack and the NASDAQ, which it's not a component of. But just to make the point, Slack has been so far ahead of the markets. It was priced to perfection. Investors wanted perfection, and they didn't get it. So today, a big down day, even though within the context of the jobs report and overall that big rally on that very big job surprise, Emily.
All right, Abigail, thanks so much. We're going to speak with Slack CEO Stuart Butterfield in just a moment, but I do want to quickly hit on jobs and another company that's working to accelerate hiring for millions of unemployed folks across the country. Workstream is a hiring platform that works with over 5,000 managers to streamline the hiring process. Companies like Chick-fil-A, Uber, DoorDash, and more. Joining me now on the phone, the co-founder and CEO of Workstream, Desmond Lim. So, Desmond, what is the data telling you in terms of what the big employers are seeing? Who's hiring? Who's laying off? Where are things accelerating and slowing down?
Thank you so much, Emily. So I surely see a trend over the past few days and weeks. There's been many restaurants, QSR trying to actually open up and, trying to actually hire fast. We see the trends in this, healthcare, supermarkets. They have been strong for the past few weeks and months, and we see those actually carry on to grow. So I think, as you can see from this news and trends, we do see that more and more businesses, companies, they are trying to open up in the past few days and weeks, and we think that trend, it would actually carry on to grow.
What about, though, potentially a second wave of infections? What about what's going on with these protests, which has, left many businesses closed as they try to protect themselves? I mean, what about potential hiccups along the way to reopening?
Yeah, that is a really good thing to ask. Over the past few weeks, we have seen many of our current clients use our software to do this contactless hiring and this actually screening. So we see more and more people trying to actually leverage video, texting, trying to use tools that can actually help them to screen and to actually hire people in a way that is safe and fast. We see more and more, we see a trend of more and more of this actually businesses trying to set up process workflow that can help to keep people safe. So we think that trend, it would actually carry on. People know that there could be this second wave or maybe even worse, third wave, but people know that they always have to keep things going. So they are trying to change the way that they work, trying to change the way that they screen, hire people, and source. And by trying to do that, they are trying to use more video, texting, trying to set up workflows that can keep them safe.
All right, Desmond Lim, the CEO of Workstream, thank you so much for joining us. Obviously, we're going to continue to watch these jobs numbers and the trends within. Coming up, Slack reporting record revenue, but the stock plummeting. We'll talk to CEO Stuart Butterfield about why. That's next. This is Bloomberg. If there are any winners in this pandemic, one of them has been Slack, a company that is helping people work remotely, with more and more people flocking to the service as they work from home. That said, after Slack reported its earnings results earlier this week, the company reporting record revenue but withdrawing its billings forecast for the year. That led shares to plummet. Joining me now, Slack CEO and co-founder Stuart Butterfield. Stuart, investors clearly are a little concerned that perhaps Slack isn't going to benefit as much as they thought, and certainly there are high expectations. What happened here?
Well, I wouldn't want to speculate as to what investors are thinking, but I'll point out that the stock has fallen all the way back to the price it had last Wednesday. And last Wednesday, that was a pretty big run up from the weeks prior. I, as an executive, can't pay much attention to the short-term movements. I got to be thinking about the value 5 years from now or 10 years from now. But I think especially in this market, because there's a lot going on, there's a lot for people to factor in, and there's a lot of unusual volatility. I think
now, in withdrawing the billings forecast, you've said that the second half of the year is just too complex. What clues do you have about what the second half of the year will actually look like?
Well, we do know that there's going to be a significant tailwind. So we added 12,000 net new paid customers last quarter. So that compares to 5,000 the quarter prior, or 5,000 the quarter prior to that. We added 90,000 new organizations using Slack, and that's more than we did in the entirety of last year. So that will pay off for us. What we don't know is the strength of the headwinds that we're going to see. The businesses that were most acutely affected by the crisis have already felt that. I think to large measure, there's no airlines who are only now figuring out that business is down. What we don't know is the trickle-down effects or the knock-on effects for the rest of the economy. Today's job numbers, good. There's still many people unemployed. There's still kind of a lot of people whose stimulus checks and or unemployment is going to run out really soon. And I don't think we have any good idea of what the world looks like in September, October, November. And so balancing that tailwind and that headwind is a little tough for us.
As you alluded to, the return to work will be slow. The return to school will be slow. I have no idea when my kids are going back to school, when we're going back into the office. That said, it will happen. Hopefully there's a vaccine. When you're looking farther ahead, longer term, do you see a point where Slack's growth potentially slows dramatically, plateaus, or even drops as we go back to whatever new normal is?
No, I don't think so. I mean, we had 100,000 plus customers before this crisis hit. All of those people, or most of those people, were working in offices and absolutely found the benefit of Slack, decided to pay for it. And I think if, this is so hard to tell at this point, but if people head back to offices en masse, they will still retain their Slack usage because they're still going to get the same advantage that our customers have traditionally had. So I don't think there's any real relationship there. Slack does improve your ability to communicate, align internally, and I think that's one of the challenges from of distributed work. So it helps there, but it's not specifically designed for that in any way. And I think what we have seen here, because this was so disruptive, because it was so dislocated, and 0% of CEOs across this country would have said that they would be able to have their whole company working from home inside of a week. And when you got to do it, it becomes possible. That's going to be so cause so many downstream changes that we think that this shift in the way that people are working is actually generational. So it's like the original wave of IT in the 60s and 70s. It's like the adoption of email in the 90s and 2000s. And we're just at the beginning of seeing how that plays out.
So how are you thinking about reopening offices right now? I know you said September. Is that still the case? Could it be later? Are you thinking about potentially letting employees work from home forever, like Jack Dorsey?
Yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of complexity there, but I can't imagine going back to normal. I think we'll absolutely have a much higher percentage of people working remotely. What we've seen the demand for is actually kind of interesting. What people want is flexibility. So I like coming into the office sometimes. I don't love my commute, so I want to be able to come in 2 days a week, or maybe we get together for on-sites or planning sessions to kind of come up with a plan. And then when we have just work to do, we stay home. It's too soon to know how that will work. What we said was they're definitely not going to open before September. And I think we're likely to extend that further. I can't imagine opening offices on a very limited basis for those employees who would prefer to work there just because they're going crazy inside their house, or they don't really have the facilities in their home. But going back to normal, I don't know if we ever will, and certainly it's not going to be soon.
Now, you are incredibly active on social media, active on social justice. I have to get your thoughts on this Twitter versus Facebook call, the call that Twitter made about the president's tweet suggesting looters be shot, and the call that Facebook made or did not make, we should say. Who's going to be on the right side of history there?
I am glad that I don't have to make that choice. And obviously, I have a tendency to be more on the side of Twitter here, but I don't really understand what the long-term ramifications of this are. And while I abhor the speech, I'm not sure what the right response is going to be and what's going to actually be most constructive in making some positive change. Because I think the situation that we're in now is just, it's intolerable, I would say, for every citizen. I don't think anyone's happy with what's happening right now.
Now, you've always been very vocal about these issues, and Slack has put its money where its mouth is. You've created one of the most diverse workforces by comparison in Silicon Valley. Now we're hearing so many companies and CEOs making commitments and saying they're doubling down. Are you worried it's going to be more words than action, and how do we hold them accountable?
I think, going off script a little bit here, but I saw someone screenshot a response from Hulu, and Hulu had done their Black Lives Matter tweet or Facebook post, and the person who responded, well, you lost me as a customer, and I got 50 of my friends, and we're all leaving you. And the response was, thanks for the update from the clan meeting. And the reason I think that's important is because it sends a strong signal that is just an intolerable opinion. To be, you can't argue against Black Lives Matter and be a member of civil society. And I don't know that was the case when the Black Lives Matter entered the lexicon in 2014. So the words do matter to some extent. I do believe that we need to see some serious follow-up actions, and Slack is absolutely no different in that respect. We have plenty of work to do. The way that I think or that I guess I hope that people are held accountable, is through increased transparency, but also just a shift in what we all regard as acceptable, a shift in what we believe is the kind of minimum standard. And as that minimum standard increases, the pressure increases for people to exceed it.
Absolutely. And Black Lives do matter. There is nothing partisan or political about it. Slack CEO Stuart Butterfield, always appreciate having your thoughts here on the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, coming up, we're going to be speaking with the CFO of Zoom, another pandemic supposed winner, also seeing soaring growth. Kelly Steckelberg joins us next. This is Bloomberg. Zoom reported a 170% increase in first quarter revenue and maintained a forecast for the year, expecting $500 million in revenue this quarter. Earlier, I spoke with Zoom's Chief Financial Officer, Kelly Steckelberg, about how the company will live up to high expectations for the rest of the year.
We are fortunate that we added 500 customers in the upmarket with greater than $100,000 of annual recurring revenue in Q1. And these are upmarket customers which typically commit to annual or multi-year agreements. So we do have greater visibility than probably some companies do into our future revenue. Now, with that said, as we have indicated that Q3 and Q4 could be flat to Q2, that's because there is half of our customer base that we added in Q1 of our sales in Q1 were on monthly contracts. So there is a little more potential volatility around those customers, and with uncertainty around how long does this pandemic last? Is there, economic uncertainty? While we're seeing a lot of great news today, it's uncertain as to what the real long-term economy looks like. And so that's why we are guiding to flat for Q3 and Q4.
At some point, though, maybe there's a vaccine and people really do go back to work and there's no problem with going to school and people are tired of Zoom fatigue. At what point is that and what does it mean for Zoom? I mean, do you foresee a point where growth plateaus or dips because of a pullback?
Yeah. So first of all, how could anybody be tired of Zoom? No, I mean, I think what we've seen is that video communications has really been integrated in all aspects of our lives, not just our work lives, but also our social lives and our personal lives. And I think people have seen how efficient and effective it can make them in their day. So sure, maybe you don't want to spend all of your day now on Zoom meetings, but I think that we're going to see a mixed approach to that. And we've all learned it's a great way to keep in touch with our family and friends around the globe if you can't be with them personally or in person. And we also have many other products, and now we have this broader customer base we can sell into. So Zoom Phone, our cloud-based PBX product that is a great match with Zoom meetings. And so we're looking forward to having the opportunity to sell that into our customers, as well as people think about going back into the workplace, we have Zoom Rooms, which is our conference room solution. And that integrates really nicely with Zoom meetings. So it's a great way to connect maybe some people that are going to continue to work from home, but having teams in the office as well. So we do see the opportunity to continue to grow.
You're the one who's modeling this out. You only see an upward trajectory.
For the long term, yes, we are very confident in our long-term trajectory.
All right. Now, you've said you'll not offer end-to-end encryption to free users. You've got at least a senator, Consumer Reports, asking Zoom to reconsider this stance. It created a bit of controversy. Is it something you'll reconsider?
So currently today, we offer AES 256 GCM encryption to all of our customers, both free and paid. So we are in the early planning stage of working on building an end-to-end encryption product at scale, which is something that has not been done previously. We're excited about doing this. We recently acquired Keybase to help us with this. And in thinking about who end-to-end encryption will be available to, what we're really trying to balance is both the security and privacy of our customers, but also the safety of some vulnerable groups like children. And so that's the consideration here, and thinking about offering potentially end-to-end encryption for users who we can identify. And that's the balance that we're trying to strike here.
Now, your CEO, Eric Yuan, also said that Zoom would work with law enforcement, which didn't hit the right note given all of the protests happening across the country. Is that something you'll reconsider, or can you clarify what he really meant there?
What he really meant there is when there are situations where law enforcement is looking into unfortunate situations, such as potentially child abuse, that we do comply with subpoenas and we do want to support those types of investigations.
Talk to us then about the progress that you've made in terms of security and privacy. It's obviously been a subject of great controversy. I know you've lost some customers as a result of it. Have you had any government inquiries or any potential investigations being announced into the security and privacy issues around Zoom that you can share with us?
So security and privacy has been something, as you say, we have really been focused on over the last 2 months. We are about 2/3 of the way through our 90-day plan, and this has included remediating some situations. We've set up a CISO council with some of the great talent from around the technology companies who want to give us input, and we're listening to that input. Eric has been available doing weekly webinars so that we hear back from the community on what else we can be doing and to answer any questions. We've been spending lots of time individually with our existing customers as well as prospects to help them understand what our plans are and to hear from them what we can do to further our privacy and security stance. This is something that will be forever integrated in how Zoom approaches our design, in thinking about our products and balancing privacy and security with usability and reliability of the product. So it's not something that we're going to focus on for 90 days and then we're done. It is something that we will forever be focusing on as a company.
Zoom CFO Kelly Steckelberg there. Coming up, an hour-long call with Mark Zuckerberg left civil rights leaders disappointed and frustrated. We're going to talk to one of the civil rights leaders who was on that call, Vanita Gupta, next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. Mark Zuckerberg's inaction about one of the president's posts on Facebook has angered Facebook employees, former employees, and civil rights leaders alike. Participants on a call with the Facebook CEO this week said Zuckerberg, in their opinion, can't fully understand why a hands-off approach is a problem. One person who joined that call is Vanita Gupta, president and CEO of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. I spoke with her earlier today.
We told Mark that those tweets and those posts that the president made actually violated the four corners of their voter suppression policy that's on the books, a policy that we had helped create but actually thought was insufficient and had been working to strengthen. But even on the policy that they have, those tweets violated them. And on the looters and shooters comment that it violated their policy against incitement to violence. And he disagreed and doubled down on that decision and tried to explain his reasoning. But to us, his reasoning made no sense and actually betrayed a lack of understanding about existing voting rules, the state of voting litigation around the country, and the like. And I think showed why we think it's so important for Mark to have the right people in the room, have civil rights expertise in the room when he was making these decisions.
Now, I understand there was a lot of pushback. Do you feel like he heard you, that he understands your position?
I think he understands our position. I think he disagrees with it. I worry that he has a different view, as I said, about the understanding of what is happening in voting and what the existing voting rules are. But I also think he heard a lot from his own employees this week, who had a lot of things to say about all of this as well. So, you know, he's a smart guy. I think he knows that he understands the positions. I don't think he fully understands voting in America and what the rules are, but I think he believes that this is just a disagreement. What worries me is I think he views this through a partisan lens, as somehow Democrats versus Republicans. But for the civil rights community, this is actually about the voter suppression policies, the nonpartisan efforts that we have built with Facebook pretty painstakingly and over time, that basically that he is not complying with.
Now, how many times have you met with him and Sheryl Sandberg previously, and do you get a sense that his views are changing in a certain direction? Because I understand you've been meeting with them quite frequently.
We have a fair amount of engagement. I would say less with Mark, more with Sheryl, although in the past year, it's been a little bit more with Mark. I have been, our teams at the Leadership Conference and other civil rights groups have been working with the company, as I said, on a range of different issues through the civil rights audit. There have been some things that they've made progress on. We made progress on the fact that they had been allowing for unlawful targeting through their ads, and they stopped doing that, and they settled ongoing litigation. We helped craft at the Leadership Conference their policy to prevent disinformation and interference with the census. It was a pretty robust policy that the company ended up with. We've pressed them at various times around the enforcement of that policy, where they haven't caught major disinformation that they've subsequently taken down after I've had to flag it for them. But so we've had some progress, but I would say on voting in elections, they have moved far too slowly and then have failed to really understand what they are allowing on their platform and the harm that it creates. This isn't about free expression. I worked at the American Civil Liberties Union. I am a fervent defender of free expression and the First Amendment. But the company chose to have community standards. It chose to develop policies after 2016 to fight voter suppression, to fight online hate. And what we are saying, adopt out of what I thought was a sense to, define the values that they want to embody in the world. But by allowing these posts to remain that so clearly violate their own policies, they are undermining the very purpose that they had originally set out with to prevent this kind of manipulation of their platform. And it's very alarming given what we have at stake and the cost it could come with for fair elections in the United States.
Meantime, Twitter has taken a different stand. What do you think about the stand that Twitter has taken? Because obviously they're going to have to make more complicated calls heading into an election and a president who continues to be very vocal.
I mean, we have uplifted Twitter's stand. I think it is really important that Jack Dorsey made the decision that he did to enforce his own standards and take action against the president's tweets, which contained blatant lies about voting methods and procedures, and that were glorifying violence or inciting violence. So Twitter chose a different path. I think it is unfortunate, maybe more than unfortunate, that Mark Zuckerberg criticized Twitter for taking that stance, but they clearly chose and are seeking to define themselves as a company that cares about democracy, and I think is reflected in Twitter's both adoption of these policies, but more importantly, the enforcement of them, even against the President of the United States.
Do you have any concern that the moves that Twitter has taken could inflame the president more and mobilize his base? I mean, it almost, you see the president almost going to battle with social media now, especially with this executive order, and tensions are only going to start running higher.
My view of this is that the companies are choosing to stand up for certain principles when they adopt policies and community standards. And the demand from all of us should be that these companies are consistent in their application of these policies, regardless of whether you're me on the street or you're the president of the United States. And Twitter took action. I think that these issues are only going to get more and more intense. I think that the president is likely to get more and more willing to lie about voting methods and procedures and to seek to suppress voting as he gets more freaked out about the potential of a loss for him. And I think it is incumbent on anyone who cares about fair elections and any company that cares about this, that is it directly got an equity in this, to be consistent with their actions and not create some exception or exemption for the president, who has a really big bully pulpit and can threaten to undermine any ongoing efforts to fight voter suppression on these platforms.
Will you try to meet with Mark Zuckerberg again? I mean, do you have plans for that? Is that in the works?
I think the company is so powerful and has such important sway in our democracy that as frustrated and annoyed as I am, and as much as I would love to walk away, it is too important to our democracy, to our economy, for me to feel responsible about walking away. And so I'm going to continue to push. I hope Facebook employees will continue to push. I think they have a very important and powerful voice. I think there are other kind of people around and stakeholders that need to push harder to make sure that Mark, he's clearly making these decisions himself on some of these really high profile matters, is actually has the right people in the room as he is making them to understand really what is fully at stake and why creating certain special exceptions for the president or anyone else threaten to undermine all of the work that we have tried to do with the company in the last several years.
So when you say he's making the decisions himself, do you get the sense that he's not taking input from people like Sheryl Sandberg?
My sense is he has, Sheryl Sandberg and his policy team in the room, but that policy team and Sheryl, they are not civil rights experts. They don't carry the understanding of what voter suppression looks like, what the voting laws are on the books. Even as to the hate, he doesn't have the civil rights expertise that's also helping to shape his decisions. So they may be providing input, but he is certainly making the final call.
Vanita Gupta there, President and CEO of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. Coming up, we're going to hear from longtime venture capitalist and tech blogger Om Malik for his thoughts on Facebook. One hint, he's not happy. That's next. This is Bloomberg. Facebook employees and civil rights leaders aren't the only one unhappy about Mark Zuckerberg's stance on President Trump's post. Longtime venture capitalist and tech blogger Om Malik left Facebook 2 years ago. Now he's leaving Instagram and WhatsApp as well. In a blog post, he said, "I left Facebook under 2 years ago, but I remain trapped in Zuck's hell on earth. Instagram and WhatsApp had a major control on me for some stupid reason. No more. I disagree with the company and its leaders so much that I won't spend any of my attention or energy on its platforms." Om Malik joins us now on the phone. Om, you're now asking everyone to leave Facebook, WhatsApp, and Instagram. Why?
I am not asking everyone to do what I did. I'm asking them to follow their conscience. If they believe that they disagree with the company, they should do what you would do in a democracy. Just leave. And, just like you vote against the person you disagree with, you leave the brand or the platform or the company you disagree with. I think this is called civil disobedience. And in the digital domain, we can just leave. And I think we should do that if we disagree with the company. And I do, and that's why I left. I'm not going to impose my will on other people, but I would ask other people to really think hard. Like, do they want to support a company which constantly undermines the ideologies and idea of democracy and fairness and keeps changing the rules of the game all the time? I think that is the biggest challenge. Is they're not consistent. There is a lack of ethics in that company. That's how I feel about it.
To your point, Zuckerberg has said he doesn't want Facebook to be the arbiter of truth, but Facebook does fact check certain stories, just not political speech, which some have said means Facebook is holding regular people to a different standard than their politicians. They should be holding politicians to perhaps an even higher standard. What do you think Facebook should be doing in this particular situation?
Look, I don't disagree with the fact that this is a difficult situation for whether it's Facebook or Twitter or any other social platform. I think every single platform has made their bet by betting big on making popularity and engagement as the core, cornerstone of their existence. And by doing so, they cannot make the right decisions. I think, anyone can say anything, aka freedom of speech, on their platform, but it's within Facebook's rights to promote it. And I think what they fail to recognize that they have a massive platform and they continue to, amplify the voices of, that are illogical, that are sometimes untruthful, and mostly hurtful. I think that's where they're failing to do their duty as a platform. This is not about being arbiter of truth. It's about how good a platform you are and how well do you police it. I think you and I have talked about this over the last 2.5 years. They continue to fail the job of a platform, which is to make sure that misinformation doesn't get spread. It's not about them being the censors. It's about making sure that the right information is amplified and not the bad information. And I think at times there is a lot of misinformation which is getting amplified on this platform. Just like during the elections or just before the elections, they refused to acknowledge the fact that their system was being misused by foreign powers. And I think that's the biggest challenge I have with this company.
Right. You do continue to use Twitter, which did take a stand on this particular post and a couple of the other posts. But why do you think Twitter is doing so much of a better job? I mean, certainly, if you look at Twitter, you also see misinformation. You also see things that are confusing and out of context. And the president has certainly pushed the boundaries, perhaps even beyond where Twitter has drawn the line.
Well, I think, just to be clear, I'm not letting Twitter off easy on this as well. I think they continue to miss the mark as well. I mean, I have been very consistent about that as well, that these guys actually have to do their job as a platform. The only reason I'm on Twitter is because I do believe that they are actually willing to listen and take some kind of action, if not, I'm not completely satisfied with where they're going, but at least Jack is willing to listen and take some actions. I think there is more willingness to understand and adapt, with the times at Twitter. Though, can I just also
now, I
say
do want
that
to
I've
get
reduced
your...
my time on...
Go ahead.
No, I said I've reduced my time on Twitter as well. It suffers the same problems as Facebook does.
Now, I do want to get your thoughts on the overall impact of the pandemic, the health crisis, economic crisis, social crisis on the tech economy. We've seen huge companies laying off huge swaths of workers. How much do you think this will shake Silicon Valley, and what does Silicon Valley look like coming out of this?
I wrote about this very recently. I am of the belief that this is a reset and a rebirth. I don't think, people have actually understood how big a shift it is towards the tech economy. I'm even more bullish about technology and its future than I was, at the start of the year, because the pandemic is creating new behaviors and making us understand, what are these new behaviors in a very short time. I think we may see some near-term, job losses. You may see a lot of startups go out of business, but at the end of the day, technology is going to come out much more stronger, bigger, and more impactful, after this pandemic is brought under control. And at the same time, there is a moral implication which technology industry has to face, as a result of becoming more dominant. That we actually have to be thinking not just about growth and profits and constant engagement, which is what companies like Facebook do, but how do what we do impact everybody else in rest of the planet? And I think that is a conversation Silicon Valley needs to have with itself much faster than it has in the past.
All right, a rebirth and a reset. I will remember those words. Om Malik of True Ventures, always good. Always appreciate having your thoughts here on the show. Thank you so much for joining us. All right, coming up, racial equality or inequality at the forefront. We're going to speak with former Xerox CEO Ursula Burns in a moving conversation next. This is Bloomberg. Today's jobs data showed Black unemployment climbing to the highest rate since 1984. This amid an increasing call to re-examine inequality in the United States. We talked about the prevalence of racial inequality with former Xerox CEO Ursula Burns, the only Black woman to run a Fortune 500 company on a long-term basis. Take a listen to that conversation.
It's clearly just a top of my worry list, top of a concern list. But I entered this discussion and this debate during the coronavirus, at the start of the coronavirus, optimistic, interestingly enough. Optimistic about maybe coming out of this disruption time in a better position than we entered. And that meaning that people, companies in particular, paid attention to what we now call these essential workers. We start to understand what an essential worker really is, the guy who delivers food for us, the guys who stock the shelves, the guys who push the patients around, et cetera. I'm hoping that, knowing that a lot of the Black and brown people in the United States work at the lower end of the socioeconomic employment ladder, I'm hoping that we can use this time, total disruption, pandemic, racial unrest, continued socioeconomic imbalance, to reset the whole conversation about how Black and brown people are fit into the employment ladder, but also how companies view these quote unquote essential workers and how important they are, how we have to pay them, how we have to nurture them, and how we have to move them up the ladders.
We've seen.
I'm hoping it's an opportunity, but I don't know if it will be.
I'm glad you're optimistic. I hope that we can come out of the conversation still optimistic. How optimistic are you about some of the statements that are being made by corporations? I'm interested in particular because do you think they feel authentic across the board as it stands?
I think that many companies, many more than I've ever seen before. So the vast majority that are speaking now, many more than I've seen before, are starting to feel uneasy about the state of America in this space. They are starting to realize that this is fundamentally unsustainable. It's definitely unfair and wrong. And that the tilt is starting to come off. We're starting to go out of balance. And it's really important that the rhetoric in the administration, which is generally negative and definitely demeaning, that has to be offset by some action, real action, funding groups, changing employment practices, being affirmative in how they actually address their employment needs, being affirmative in hiring Black and brown people, being affirmative in progressing them through the companies, being affirmative about how they look at the C-suite and how they look at the board level. Without that passion and that drive, I think that we're going to not make progress. And I think the companies are now starting to realize more and more that not making progress is not sustainable. So they're going to have to do something. And the good news is it's kind of like it all came together at once. This is not enough to make change, but at least if we get enough of a crescendo of voices, maybe we can keep the action going. This is not the first time that a Black man has been killed by a policeman. It's not the first time. It happened before. It happened before that. And I'm hoping this time we just don't let this sacrifice of this human go unrequited, unpaid back, right? It's important that companies start to stand up and say, we have something to do with this. We have something to do with the solutions.
So, Ursula, what makes this seem different to you, that the outcome of this is going to be different and more positive than maybe what it was in the past?
Because I think that the number of the broad-based coalition that's now starting to speak Please don't get my little optimism as overjoyed optimism. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
I do not believe that what I'm hearing today is going to actually drive change. We're going to have to be involved and stay involved. All of the voices in the street, all of the voices in the news media, all of the voices in corporate America are going to have to stay involved to actually see true change. The only reason why I'm a little bit more optimistic is that people are getting fed up with the current state of play.
Ursula Burns there, the former CEO of Xerox, and powerful words to end on and to remember through this weekend. I'm Emily Chang. This is Bloomberg Technology. That's all for us. We'll see you on Monday.